is day 3 of the High School Playbook, and we are going to talk about stress less and learn more, helping anxious teens find success in school. I want you to really think seriously now about anxiety, and I want you to think about your favorite high schooler. Maybe we've had some high schoolers come into our sessions this week. Maybe you are a high schooler yourself. And I want you to think about when your child, or maybe when you as yourself as a student, feels anxious about an upcoming test. Now, you know that if like studying effectively was something that could calm someone's nerves, that would be a way out of it. But we can get so stressed out as students about projects, about tests. And it may be because we don't know those effective ways to study or ways to reduce that academic anxiety. And that is what we're going to talk about today. So my name is Rachel Moss. I am an executive function coach here with Educational Connections. I am also the professional development specialist for Educational Connections. I taught high school for more than 12 years. I also taught at the university level, at the high school level. I taught AP. I taught college and high school courses. And so I know the rigors of the classroom, and I also know how anxious students can feel about their academics. Now, we are going to talk about anxiety tonight, but I really want you to look at the letters beside my name because I am not a doctor. I am an educator. So we are going to discuss anxiety and we are going to use appropriate definitions from psychology in order to explain how students feel, and also that we have a toolkit so that we can identify and so that we can talk about things properly. But this is not a discussion that is going to give a diagnosis. This is not a one size fits all or a quick fix sort of thing. This is going to be educational strategies. So this isn't going to be a discussion of medication. This isn't going to be a thing where if you have these 5 symptoms, you have anxiety. Again, educational strategies, but nothing that's going to be medical, though we are going to use proper definitions when we talk about things. Now, as we get into this, you may have some questions. Throw them in the chat immediately. Do not wait until question and answer at the end. I want to see questions because sometimes we're just going to talk about them right away. Other times we're going to wait until question and answer. Okay, so we're going to dive right into this. Like, what is anxiety? So, when we're talking about anxiety, we want to talk about the ways that this is defined in psychology, but we're going to be looking at ways to help with academics. So, we're going to be talking educational strategies, but we do have to define this. So, there are 3 things that we can look for when we are trying to see if a student is anxious. We're going to look at inconsistent presentation. We are going to notice avoidance or hyperfixation symptoms. And this is kind of like, in a way, like 2 sides of the same coin. We're also going to talk about weak executive function skills in areas like organization, time management, and planning ahead. And we're going to define all of these as we work along here together. But we want to know that this is what we're talking about when we're talking about anxiety, because these are all things that you would see in conjunction with academics. You would see inconsistent presentation, avoidance or hyperfixation, and weak executive function skills. But a lot of times when we think about anxiety in academics, we immediately think about testing anxiety. And this is something that I experienced when I was younger as a student. I would get very nervous about certain tests. And the last time I experienced this, I was actually taking a praxis exam. So in the state of Pennsylvania, you have to take these big exams to become a teacher. Being a teacher was a dream of mine, and I can vividly remember sitting down to my first praxis exam, and it was like I couldn't read the test. Like all of the words looked scrambled to me. My eyes were feeling kind of blurry, and the pressure of that test was giving me some major test anxiety. And it's something that I've always reflected on as an educator because I knew that different students that came into my classroom would feel that way about tests. And so, as an educator, I had to learn about ways to help my students. One of the things I have always taught my students, and I work specifically with my students in executive function coaching sessions, is the strategy of spaced practice. So, this is our first strategy for academic anxiety, specifically test anxiety. And we did touch on spaced practice in day one of our webinars, but we're really going to get into it tonight. So, spaced practice is a planning method that we use to study for tests. It's a simple plan of study days and non-study days. And this type of plan is proven to help students retain more information with a break between study days because students can see like what they're missing as they study. And honestly, the best way to explain this is to show a little illustration. So I have a little calendar, a 1 week calendar up here that I feel illustrates spaced practice very well. Spaced practice really means to create space in the days of the week between study days. So the first thing that we do in this calendar is, and you can see we start on a Saturday and we're ending on a Friday. And we have two different assessments on this calendar. On Friday, we have a test in English. On Wednesday, we have a math quiz. And this is a planning method. So the first thing we do is we just back it up. I do this a lot with students in my sessions. We write down when are the tests, and then we plan out when are our study days and when are our down days. So if we have a test in English, we want to study for that the night before to brush up right before the test. We want to take a break from studying during one day. And on this little calendar, I color coded our down days or our break days in yellow. You can see that we're going to study on Tuesday. We have to study not only for English, which is happening on Friday, but we also have to study the day before that math quiz. And you can see that on Sunday, because we have that math quiz on Wednesday, we're going to study for math on Sunday. For in this little like simulation, this little example that I've created, we have 2 study days and we have off days. But notice that off days aren't like, you're putting up your feet, you're like, eating bonbons and stuff. We're still engaging in our regular homework. Another thing that I often talk with my students about in executive function coaching sessions is the need to have rest or downtime, especially when we have assessments. So you can see in my little example here, we have a birthday party to go to. This doesn't mean that we have to cram on Saturday. Oh, it's my day off. I have to cram. I have those tests coming up. It's really it's really a great way to go to have that downtime and then to make a study plan because life comes into play when we're studying. One of the things that I always tell my students who are anxious about their work is we can't grow to resent our work. We can't grow to resent school because that actually kind of breeds more anxiety. Oh, okay. So this question is really good, and I want to talk about this right now. So Glory says, what if you have 2 whole weeks of nonstop test quizzes? That is a conundrum. I need a sip of water to answer that one. Um, that does happen when you're taking advanced classes. So if you have a whole bunch of quizzes, if you have a whole bunch of assessments, one question that I would ask, a student in that scenario is, what's the weight of these? Because sometimes, like I know in my literature classroom, when we were reading Great Expectations, for example, students would have like a 3 point reading quiz at the top of class. Now that is a quiz, But studying for that means that you're going to read the chapter the night before. So essentially, in the reading, you're studying. So in this example, what I'm really talking about are those bigger assessments. So I want you to think of this math quiz like that, 30 to 50 point quiz, or that English test like the end of the unit test. So if you have 2 whole weeks of nonstop tests and quizzes, you may be able to parse out if you're a student, or if this sounds like a favorite student in your life, parse out what is the regular or small work versus what are the assessments that you need to study more for. Sometimes students will have quizzes on concepts that they are learning in their homework. So they will do the homework, they'll go over the homework, and then right after that in the same class period will be a little quiz. That is a lot different than like our unit tests. And so I think that it can be very valuable for students, especially if we're concerned about things, to be able to say, okay, here's what this teacher means by quiz. Here's what this teacher means by test. So in our little example, again, these are our bigger assessments, and we want to create time between study sessions, because what that does, again, I want to just go back one slide. If we can put space between our studying, it actually shows us what we're remembering and what we're not remembering. So if you're studying constantly all through the week, you might have a false sense of security. Oh, I know this stuff. Or maybe you think, oh, I have to study even harder because there's so much to do. When you can identify the things that you know from the things that you do not know, you are able to do better on your assessments because you're really tackling those unknowns. And those unknowns are going to be the difference between, maybe an average grade, a C, and that above average grade, an A. Another key point, if we are anxious about our tests or anything that has to do with school, we want to make sure that we are naming and noticing what is happening. So if you have a student who is dealing with anxiety and is coming to you and is talking about how they are nervous about tests, we want to make sure that we are saying things that are helpful, and we want to avoid things that are going to rush in and try to fix everything. And I think that this is just, human nature. So you have a student who you care about, whether you're an educator, a parent, and the student comes to you and says, "Oh my God, I have this history test. I am so scared. I'm so anxious about it." The number one thing I think we want to do as grown-ups, we want to rush in and we want to say, "Oh, don't worry about it. You're so smart. You're going to do great. You always do great in class. You pay attention." We want to like pep them up. But it's really important when we are engaging with students who are anxious, we want to make sure that we are focusing on what is really going to help them. And so as people who are supporting our favorite student, we want to have some great talking points. And this is something that I struggle with as an educator. When I have a student who comes to me and says, "I'm anxious about a test," I want to pep them up, but I really have to kind of pause and listen. And so I change up my talking points. So instead of rushing in to fix things, I say things like, "I get the feeling that you are really anxious about this English class. Do you think that I'm right about this? Do you think that I'm off base about this? Um, you know, do you feel like this about English every year, or is this a recent thing?" This can really help our favorite students pinpoint why they are feeling so anxious about things. And this week we've been so lucky because we've had high school students come into our week of webinars for high school students. So we've added in some talking points for high school students to help them name and notice on their own. So when you're feeling that kind of anxiety for students, I always recommend that you name what is making you feel anxious. Don't downplay it. Many times when I'm working with students in my executive function coaching sessions, they'll say things like, "Well, I'm being dumb, and I shouldn't be nervous about this." And I mean, like, I think, like, if I just calm down, everything will be okay. They'll kind of want to downplay it. But what I always say to students is, if you're serious about school, it makes so much sense that you would feel anxious about your work and you would want to do a better job. Now, all of these name and notice talking points, this helps with whatever type of anxiety we're having about school, not just test anxiety. But this is a great way to bridge into this conversation because we always think of test anxiety as the first one, but I would bet you dollars to donuts, people are probably looking at these talking points and saying, "Oh yeah, I have heard my favorite student, like, kind of like when they talk about science class, they're a little bit on edge, or man, I've been hearing a lot about math lately, and just my favorite student just seems kind of like, tense about it." So let's talk some more of these name and notice talking points. If we notice that students are struggling with academic anxiety, we want to help students talk about what triggers those cluster of feelings. And so, again, when I'm working with students in my executive function coaching sessions, I'm always listening to the way that they're talking about their classes. And when I kind of notice that there's a fixation on one class, I say things like, I noticed that you really want to talk about science, and you're spending a ton of time studying for your science class right now. I have a student who's a high schooler who I've been working with, and every single time we get together, the kid only wants to work on this one essay for English class. And week one, when we were working on it, I'm like, cool. When week two rolls around, I'm kind of like, hey, aren't we like kind of done with that essay? Oh no, I have to make edits on it. And by asking these kind of questions, like, what? I noticed last week you were really into English class, and this week rather, you're really focused on it. What's up with that? And my student came out and said, this is an essay on Shakespeare, and this is the first work by Shakespeare I've ever had to read on my own. And I'm so scared about this. I just feel like if I can do well on this, I can probably do well the whole year. And so that fixation that I noticed that trigger, and I asked a question that helped the student articulate what was going on. Even something as simple as, is there a test coming up soon? Like, I notice you're a little bit tense about history. Do you feel, and there's fireworks behind me because I gesture with my hands, which is also really cool and not embarrassing at all that this is being recorded. Another one that I like to ask my students when I notice specifically about test anxiety, do you feel like this in other classes, or is it just in this AP environmental science class? Do you get this nervous? Like, I remember a couple weeks back you had a quiz in your calc class, but you weren't like nervous like this. Is it just this one class? That can help students to articulate the triggers that they feel, the feelings that they're experiencing about their work. For students, my biggest advice is notice if your anxiety clusters around certain tasks, certain times of the year, because that can be a real way for you to identify, oh my goodness, I am dealing with some academic anxiety right now. So I told you about my student with the Shakespeare paper. That was definitely task specific anxiety. That kid was reading a work by Shakespeare on his own and then had to write a paper about it. That is a cluster of anxious feelings. I have had other students where, like, they will tell me when it comes to unit tests, the end of the unit, if we have anybody from the state of Virginia here, I know that students will have like formative versus summative assessments that they're working on. And sometimes when I'm working with my students that are from the state of Virginia, they will talk about the anxiety they feel around those formatives or summatives. These are great ways to help students identify why they feel the way that they do. We have a third set of name and notice talking points here because we want strategies, of course, to help our students. And one of the best strategies that we can use is to validate students' feelings. And this is again where we want to rush in. We want to play mama and papa bear and make everything better for the kids we care about. So if a kid's like, oh my God, I am so freaked out about this test. I am so freaked out this history teacher this year is assigning so much work. We want to rush in and pep them up. But we really need to listen and to name and notice what is going on. So a lot of times when I listen to my students, I have a student this year who really struggled with history class last year. And we actually did a reflection this past week on the anxiety that she felt in history last year versus this year. And I said to her, it strikes me that you thought that your history teacher last year really disliked you. And if I thought that my boss at work hated me, it would be so hard for me to get my work done. And this year, I noticed that you talk about your history teacher in very positive terms, and so it's so much easier for you to get that work done. Is my observation correct? This type of thing can really help the students we care about understand their feelings. And in understanding them, we can also help them kind of like move away from that. When the student I just talked about, when she was in her history classes last year, and she was so demotivated by the kind of personality clash with that one specific teacher, we would talk about that and then we would figure out what was motivating to her. So we got through that year not by focusing on a negative feeling about a personality clash with a teacher, but by focusing on the positive feelings that she had when she did her work to the best of her ability. For any students that are ever feeling anxious about things, my best advice is that you have to recognize that your worries about your classes and your teachers are real feelings and reach out to folks who get you. You might have an older friend who has been through these classes before and like, oh my God, I remember those vocab quizzes in AP US history. Those things were brutal. Let me share a study strategy with you that I worked. Or, you know what? I remember being in Mrs. Smith's algebra class and some of her homework was harder than the tests. I can understand how you feel that way. And sometimes you reach out to your parents, to another teacher, to your counselor in order to help move through things. So it's always wonderful to have talking points when we understand that children who we care about are dealing with anxiety. But we also want to understand anxiety itself. So I said that in this webinar, we were going to define some things related to anxiety. And so here's one of our sort of like definition areas. So we talked about test anxiety and we talked about ways to talk to our favorite anxious learners. Now we want to understand some of the presentation of anxiety. And so we'll see one of two things, hyperfixation or avoidance. And as I talk about this, this may really connect with you. And I would encourage you, put questions that you have about this or observations that you have about this in the chat, because that would be a great way for us to have a dialogue together. So when students are anxious, they will sometimes engage in hyperfixation, and that means that they will focus on one specific task or problem while ignoring everything else in life sometimes, or while ignoring a lot of other things. And so when we have kids who are hyperfixated, I often see one of two paths for hyperfixation. One is crisis mode, and that is like the kid who is working as if driven by a motor at the last minute, staying up all night, studying as much as they can. They are just so nervous, so worried, and they are going, going, going. Okay. So they kind of, sometimes I'll have students that'll say, I just need to lock in and just focus on only this one thing and get the best grade that I can, and then I can get this done. And I had a student on my, I still have this student on my roster, and when he and I started working together, anytime he was anxious about an academic task, he would go into crisis mode. He would pull all-nighters. He would look up YouTube videos to review the material. He would get study guides and notes from his friends. And it was just, he was hyper fixated and in crisis mode about this one particular thing. And it had a detrimental effect because as he was focused on whatever he felt the crisis about, he was ignoring homework in other classes. He was not getting enough rest. So when he would go to his sport, he wasn't performing at, his top function. So these are like examples of crisis mode. The other thing that I see in kids who are hyperfixated is what I call the crystal ball syndrome. This is like phrasing I've made up. And so here's what I mean by that. Sometimes students who are hyperfixated will begin to talk about the academic task as if it has already happened and they know what's going to happen. Unless I study for like 3 hours a night, I'm never going to I'm going to fail this test. I have to study for 3 hours a night, and then that'll mean that I don't fail. I have to make sure, that like I can't go out this weekend. I can't do anything else. I have to get this work done. And what I'll say to students who are engaging in that type of hyperfixation is, you are not looking in a crystal ball. It feels like you are telling the future because you are focusing on something that is in the future, but your thoughts about it aren't really happening and they may have no basis in reality. A student may feel like they are coming up with what's going to happen through that hyperfixation, but it's really just being anxious and then thinking about all of the bad outcomes that could take place if they don't engage in certain types of tasks. So those are two ways that hyperfixation will present itself. Another thing that happens with students who are anxious is avoidance behavior. So this is basic kind of like fight or flight too. You can think about it that way. So if you're afraid of something, and anxiety is a type of fear, you're going to fight it, and that can be like hyperfixation, or you are going to run away. And that is avoidance behavior. So avoidance is kind of like an all or nothing mentality. It's thinking about a task, and it is so overwhelming that a student may avoid it completely. I have a student on my roster. We've been working together for about 3 years. And when she and I started working together, she was very anxious about her work and would retreat into avoidance mode. And her avoidance mode was actually very productive. So, like, instead of writing the paper, she would do something like she would do homework that wasn't due for 2 weeks, or she would do bonus work for another class. At one point, she signed up for a free, like, online course in a completely different subject, and it was an avoidance behavior. Well, I'm too busy. I'm doing this online class on this ancient history topic. I don't have time to work on this calculus class, because I'm doing something that's so much more important. And when we talked about like why these choices were being made, we got down to the root of it was an avoidance behavior. So you can get all these great grades in these other subjects, but the calculus class just seems so overwhelming that the student feels like it is absolutely impossible to get it done. I've also had students dealing with, like academic anxiety who will refuse to turn in work, even if it's done or partially done. And then when I ask them, hey, what was up with that? Like you and I worked on this has happened a lot of times when I start working with students. You and I were working on that assignment for your history class, and you did a really great job on that, analyzing the John Adams presidency. And you and I just looked at your learning management system and you didn't turn it in. Are you okay? And then the student will say to me, well, I mean, it wasn't going to be perfect, so I mean, why even turn it in? I mean, there was actually like one question that I didn't finish. So, I mean, if I can't get like a full, perfect score on it, like I don't even see a reason to turn it in. My first question in this scenario for avoidance is to kind of like call out the behavior a little bit, not in a way where you're coming down on a kid, but in a way where you got to name and notice. Because we have a really great question, like how to help with avoidance behavior. My first question to students is always, okay, I understand that you want like a perfect grade. I understand that. That's easy to understand. Explain to me why you are going to choose to get a big old goose egg, a big old zero in the grade book. Why choose that when you could actually get a grade? That's a first question that I ask. Now, we have a strategy to help with both hyperfixation and avoidance. So that question, how to help with it, it's coming at you right now. So the number one strategy that I use when I see students that are dealing with hyperfixation and avoidance in their academic tasks is I use the Pomodoro method. And if you're familiar with the Pomodoro method, honestly, like put it in the chat, let me know. But I'm going to just give a little bit about it in case we have folks who are, who aren't familiar with it. So the Pomodoro method was developed by a gentleman named Francesco Cirillo. He was a university student in the 1980s, and he was anxious about his sociology work. He could not focus on anything. He just kept thinking he was going to fail. The book was too boring. He hated the subject. I mean, if you like, it's like a lot of avoidance behaviors. And so he got really fed up with himself, though, because he could see that his avoidance behaviors were not resulting in good grades. He gets really mad at himself and is like, oh, I'm so, like, why am I doing this? I bet could I even pay attention for 2 minutes? And he grabs his kitchen timer, sets it for 2 minutes, and challenges himself to read the darn book that he's saying is too stupid, too boring, why should I read it? Lo and behold, he reads it for 2 minutes and he actually retains the information. This is like one of those light bulb moments for somebody. He ends up studying the human attention span, and he's one of the world's foremost authorities on this. Like he works with like, the big companies out there like Google and stuff, and he's a productivity expert. Um, so what he found out is that the human attention span is about 25 minutes long. And if we can really tap into that, we can get our work done very effectively. So the Pomodoro method is pretty simple. You get a timer. A lot of times I will have students talk to the digital assistant on the phone, like, hey, digital assistant, set a timer for whatever. And then you work for that time. But there's a little bit that you need to do. Like the first thing I always tell my students is, get your drink, get your like little water or whatever, get all your materials, put on your music. 25 minutes isn't for setup. 25 minutes is for getting down to business. So when I do this in my sessions with students, the first thing I do is like, do you have your pencil? Do you have your drink? Do you have your guide? Run around, get it all. Once they get it all, we set that timer and we focus on work. In my sessions with students, we take a 5-minute break because a Pomodoro method has 25 minutes of work and 25 minutes of timed break. But when I'm working with a student, I actually use that 5 minutes for reflection. The break in the Pomodoro method can be whatever you want it to. Go get a popsicle, feed the fish, take the dog for a walk around the backyard, and come on back. But since I'm working with students and helping with executive function, I want to know what's working for you. How did it feel to focus on that work for 25 minutes, especially for avoidance, you know? How did it feel to do that and actually like engage with it for that short amount of time period? And the other thing is you don't have to do 25 minutes. Many times when I start working with students on this method, I will actually start with 15 minutes, which I call a mini Doro. And then I will like kind of work them up to the longer, attention span period of time. If a student is dealing with hyperfixation, this is a massive strategy because instead of them spending all of the time on the one thing, it gives a literal time limit so that they can also walk away. And the reflection for students who are dealing with hyperfixation is very similar. How does it feel to work on this only for a short period of time? Are you proud of the work that you did? Tell me something you did well. Are you surprised that you got so much done? So these are all ways, and I want to bring out the reflection bit here because since we have so many, adults and parents who care about their high school students, this is something you can try together. Body doubling, that would be where you are working and the student is working for those, 25 or 15 minutes is also a great way to supercharge this. So I always tell parents, get out your laptop, you go through your email, they're doing their vocab work, or maybe you're balancing the checkbook for 25 minutes and they're working on their history assignment. But that thing where you're doing your work quietly and they're doing their work quietly, it's a wonderful way to be involved, but also to give your favorite learner autonomy. So there's actually a couple questions in here about the Pomodoro method that I just want to address right now. Okay. So we have somebody that does use the Pomodoro method and the timer works really well. Yeah, and Joy, I love this reflection that you shared with us. Motivation is knowing that he will have a 5-minute break if he can concentrate on a topic for 25 minutes. Yeah, I have so many students that use this on their own between sessions. And that 5-minute break, I have students where they have a playlist of like songs, like one or two together, that's like 5 minutes. Younger students will, like my middle schoolers, will like they tell me like I do a dance break for 5 minutes, which I think is adorable. Some of my older college students, like I have one that really loves like to drink tea, and he's like, it's just a perfect 5-minute tea break. I make my perfect cup and then come back to work for 25 minutes more. So yeah, that 5 minutes, you think it's not going to be that big, but it is, because it's timed as well. Um, okay, so Jen says Pomodoro doesn't work with my ADHD inattentive teen. She has avoidance behaviors and strongly resists committing to any type of schedule or timeline. That's rough. My suggestion there would be think about reducing the time, even 10 minutes, even 15 minutes, and also talk about like chunking the work. I've had students that deal with ADHD and they deal with being anxious, and so that resistance is something that I've dealt with. And so I've done like, pomodoro means tomato in Italian. The gentleman who discovered all this, he's Italian. I kind of talk about it like bites of the tomato. Like maybe we can't take the 25-minute bite right now. Maybe we start off at 10 and then we talk about it. I think that also in the reflection, if you're doing this paired with your teen, the reflection could be, okay, so talk to me about why this feels resistant right now. Is there anything that's making this feel less resistant to you? And even if it's just a little bit, like a little step forward, that can be really powerful in order to help students get through their work and feel less anxious. And then Glory shared, I have a short a time span when it comes to studying and reading school text. My longest is a full two uninterrupted minutes. Yeah, that's the thing, Glory. Sometimes we got to baby step this, And so it might be that you have 2 minutes right now. I would give you like a tiny challenge. Maybe try 5. If 5 doesn't work, try 3, you know? You can also do things where you read and then you read the next section aloud. And then the next section you read and you write like a note about what you've read in the next three. Sometimes when it comes to those reading tasks, which really take a lot of our attention, if we can kind of like switch it up a little bit, do something different for every little bit of reading, it can help to supercharge our attention because now we're doing something different, like we're helping our attention span along. And that little like insight that I just shared with Glory from that great question, that's something that everybody can use, to help with those tasks that make students anxious. One of the best ways that we can help student anxiety is through student self-advocacy. So, self advocacy is, of course, the process of students identifying and then reaching out for support from others. So, one of the things that I've noticed, especially with working with high schoolers who are maybe feeling a little bit anxious about things, is that they don't want to talk about it with anyone. As an executive function coach, they will talk about it with me. But then one of the things that I always share with them is like these are the questions that I ask. So if a student comes to me and says, that they're worried about something, they're anxious about something, my number one question is, who have you talked with about this who isn't me? Did you talk to mom about this? Did you talk to, maybe your volleyball coach or your best friend? Like, did you talk to somebody else who isn't me? Because I want to get that student towards self-advocacy. I want to get that student to explain how they are feeling to someone in the school. And so one of the things that I do to engage students in the skill of self-advocacy is to give them conversation prompts. Because many times students don't even know how to start the conversation. And so these are, I have like starter sentences. And as a literature and writing teacher, this is something that I always do for students when they have to like write an essay. Like, here's a starter thesis, plug in the parts. It'll be kind of, corny at first, but then you make it yours. And it's things as simple as, um, Mrs. Smith, I'm really having a hard time with, these like linear equations that we're doing. And I was wondering if there was something that you could suggest that I could use, or maybe I could talk with you about it. Or, I need some study help because we have this test coming up on the Federalist Papers. And, Mr. Ham, I'm not remembering all the parts of it. Could you is there some way like that could help me memorize it? Or do you have any like study tricks for this one? Or this is something that's so important. Anytime I'm working with a student that has an individualized education plan, I always coach them to talk to their teachers in these terms. I want you to know that I do better when I have like structured notes. Is there any way that you could print out the Google slide deck for me, or that you could share it with me and I could print it out before class? Because having that structure will help me take notes better and then I can do better in the class. I also give students questions that they can use to talk to teachers. Like, remember when we learned about iambic pentameter? And now we're doing all these sonnets, and I gotta be real with you. I don't remember it. Like, I can't like hear it like you talked to us about before. Would you help me hear it again? Or I need help understanding. All of this stuff about the plains biome. Like, I don't really understand what kind of animals live there and how that's like different than a forest. So would you help me with that? Or when is the best time that we could meet to go over material before the test? Could I come in before school? Do you have a time after school? This is one of the most powerful ways to help an anxious student because it gets the feelings out of their heads and out of their mouths. And once they articulate to their teachers how they are feeling and they advocate for that help, a lot of those anxiety feelings and a lot of those anxiety behaviors are going to tamp down. The other thing that I do with students is I use an email template. And we have this on our website. I can try to track this down. I think you can see I'm doing this webinar solo tonight, so I don't have all of the links, and I apologize for that. But I'm going to try to do my best here. But we use an email template. And what this does is what I tell my students in my executive function coaching sessions is this is the most boring Mad Libs you are ever going to do. And you can see it's just like, hey, dear teacher's name, we have a greeting, we state the issue, what they're writing about. Please let me know if, like, they go through their question. And then when we're all done, we have this nice little email here. I'm writing to you about my algebra quiz corrections. When I log into Schoology, it shows that it's submitted. However, it's been more than 2 weeks and there's no grade. Could you let me know if it's missing? Do you need me to resubmit it? So this is another way to have some great self-advocacy, and it is a little bit like it's a little bit more depersonalized because you don't have to go up to your teacher, but you can send a really nice worded email to your teacher about the issue. And I do have the link. I hope that this link works. If somebody could click on it and let me know, but you should be able to find the resource of our email template there. Now, before we get into question and answer, I have been talking a lot about our executive function coaching sessions because I am an executive function coach with Educational Connections. Our sessions all take place on Lesson Space, which is our software that is designed specifically for education. We work one-on-one with students and we focus on academic issues and come up with academic strategies to help students learn best and move through their material. We're also working on planning, organization, time management. So by bolstering executive function skills, we are really helping to reduce academic anxiety. And it also really helps students. I mean, I have a lot of students on my roster who are anxious about things in school. And a lot of times when they talk with me, I am somebody who deeply cares about them. But I'm also somebody that, like, I say to my students, like, this is my little joke, but it's true. I got no skin in the game here. I'm not grading them. I am not grading my students. I am here, however, to help them get the grades they want and to help them reduce stress and reduce anxiety so that they can do their best work. Every single session has 4 parts. We check through tests and assignments. We make a plan and write everything down. We do work in the session so that students get to collaborate on their tasks that are making them feel anxious, or to work solo and get feedback from an educator so that they can feel more confident about their work overall. And the 4th part of our sessions is reflection. This is happening throughout the session. We're figuring out what works, we're figuring out what the pain points are, and we are tailoring everything to each individual child. I say this all the time, but it's true. It's not more school after school. It is helping students get through the things that they need to get done. And so our sessions are really built on their issues, their tasks, and we're building skills in the things they already are doing. So one last little thing, tomorrow is our last day of our high school playbook. We are featuring college admissions game plan, what matters most in every year of high school, with one of our college consultants, Renee Minich. So if you've ever wondered what colleges really care about, from grades to test scores, activities, and essays, this is for you. Renee is going to share a clear grade by grade roadmap to help any teen stand out without burning out. And I wish I could be there tomorrow, but I'm actually meeting with a student. So if you are interested in these sessions, you can scan the QR code, you can send an email, you can give a call. One of our professionals is going to be there to help you. And let's do some Q&A. And I'm going to stick around for another 10 minutes because we've had a great conversation so far. Okay, so there is one here. A hypothetical question. What if your parents or friends waves off your anxiousness as nothing to worry about, even though it is a big deal to you? What should you do then? Okay, so Glory, here's my thinking. You are a young person that people deeply care about. And when you are feeling anxious, the people who love you, they want to pep you up. They want to say, "Oh my God, you're going to be great at it. Don't worry about that. Everything's going to be okay." And if you are genuinely anxious, it's nice to know that people care about you. I mean, who wouldn't care about you? But it also is like, you know, you're not helping me feel better. I would say, like, maybe advocate, like maybe you have in your classes, I would say maybe advocate to your teacher. So if there's a certain class that you're worried about, talk to your teacher and use some of those self-advocacy strategies. You know, I remember when we learned about this concept. I got to be real with you, Mrs. Jones. I'm nervous about this. Could I talk with you about it? That may be a way to get the support that you want. I'm guessing that the folks that are, like, quote unquote waving off your anxiousness, they don't want you to feel bad. And so they may just be being caring to you, but also like thinking like they're going to pep you up. So I don't know if we have any other questions. Maybe we have questions about um, how to get the template for the email. I did not put it in the right place. Thank you so much, Alice, for saying that, because I didn't do it right. I actually sent the little thing to myself. Let me try it again. Okay. Okay, there we go. I also want to share a couple other links with you before we we say goodbye to each other. Anybody who is interested in our services, that next link that is called ectutoring.com/get started, that would be a great way for you to learn more about our programs and all of the things that we offer. Okay, thank you too for giving me confirmation that the link works. And I think there was a question. Okay, Alice, you asked a question earlier. I knew there was one. IEP accommodations are not being followed in a large urban school. Um, so I think, is this a question about, like, this seems to be a law question, and I wish that I could provide insight into that, but that would be something, every state, every county has its own set of laws. It does sound like from your question that you are taking advocacy very seriously and you're taking great steps to provide support for the learner that you love and care about. I think that, I can provide educational solutions, but I'm not somebody that can provide law-based solutions. Um, Again, I'm willing to hang out a couple more minutes if we have any other questions, if we have any other, thoughts about this. I really hope that the strategies here will help families, will help the students that you care about, because I think that every single kid has dealt with anxiety at one time or another. Some years of school are very anxiety producing years. Some years are smooth sailing. And especially in high school, it always seems that 10 and 11 can be really anxiety producing years. Also, ninth grade can be a very anxious year because in some schools, it's that first year of high school. So I hope that these solutions and suggestions have resonated with folks. We would love to see you on day 4. Thank you for being here. And you have a beautiful night.